Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to Wine School number 5. I'm Chris Stang, CEO and co-founder of The Infatuation. The man and the goats to my, I guess it's my left, right? I don't know what it is. That's Grant Reynolds. He is he's the partner in Delicious Hospitality Group, restaurants, Pasquale Jones, Legacy Records, Charlie Bird. Also has a great wine shop called Parcel, which hopefully you have ordered from, and hopefully you got some wine from Parcel that you're drinking with us today. He and I also wrote a book called How to Drink Wine. I always do this and try to show it, but then the background, the stupid background I have, makes it vanish. So hold on. I'm going to show you my weird little room that I'm in. Okay, that's our book, How to Drink Wine. It comes out May 12th. It is a book that's going to teach you how to drink wine, ranging from tasting to swallowing it to learning about regions and grapes and all kinds of different things. So that's why we're here. Also because we're all locked in a room and trying to figure out how to spend our time. So we thought, why don't we get together and drink wine and talk about it, and hopefully we can all learn some stuff and have good discussions. So I'm going to actually really quickly drop the link to both the book pre-order, but also the way, if this is, if somehow you just ended up here, not through this channel, that link right there will take you to a newsletter sign up. And what we try to do is write about the wines about a week before, and then you can read about them, hopefully buy them so you can drink them with us. And then we host our class the following Tuesday. And we're actually selling the wines in like a 6-pack now, so you can buy a bunch of them and not be trying to play the shipping game, and hopefully have everything you need as we go through them. So the last piece, which hopefully many of you are familiar with now that we've done it for a few weeks, but there's a worksheet in here in the top of that chat, the Dropbox link that you see, which is the worksheet that you can use to follow along today, and hopefully kind of keeps things more organized, and you can know what we're going to chat about and what to expect while we go through it. So enough prefacing the class. Today is the Loire Valley, which, probably you've had some wine from, but also probably there's some learnings to be had about this part of the world. And we have a great wine that Grant will start off by mentioning, and hopefully you all have it. And then we'll dive into the Loire Valley itself and some other wines from the area, and then some producers. And I think what we're trying to do today is we'll end with talking more broadly, I think, about Sauvignon Blanc from other places, because it feels like that'll be a topic that people are interested in. But try to, if you have questions, we'll try to sort of stay generally on the roadmap that is the worksheet, and then we'll jump into stuff at the end that may or may not be related. So Grant, you want to start just by talking about the wine, and we'll jump into the region?
Yeah, that sounds great.
I'm going to put my background back.
You can throw it up. Okay. Sweet. You're in Sancerre, right? So, hi guys.
There.
Beautiful. If you do a Google search for the Loire Valley, a lot of big mansions, chateaus show up.
The goats.
So if you're trying to make some money, you should get in the Sauvignon Blanc game, apparently. But this wine, this is cool. This is a smaller producer. I think Sancerre, probably a lot of you have, if not all of you have heard of Sancerre. I think it's probably one of the, 5 top most recognized wine regions for that matter. But we're drinking a wine from a producer, smaller producer that's literally just in the next town over. I'm not sure in which direction from where Chris is at, but just the next sort of collection of old buildings over, really the same area, the same geography, the same climate, and also the same grape, there you go, as Sancerre, called Menetou Salon, which you see there. And then Morogue is just the name of the town. And they put that on there because they make a whole bunch of different wines from Menetou Salon. But just like if you see Sancerre on a label and you see Menetou Salon, we also wrote in the worksheet a few other towns that you associate with Sauvignon Blanc, or that you would see, you associate them with Sauvignon Blanc. So Sancerre, as well as Menetou Salon, the grape is always Sauvignon. So no matter what, legally, if they're going to throw that on the label, they have to produce the wine from 100% Sancerre. This is a producer who, this is like an area, I think, you know, because it's such a big brand and it's such a large region, there's a lot of really inexpensive Sancerre made. And it's just made in a way that is just meant to be kind of commercialized, cheap, taste really fruity, almost sometimes a little bit sweet. And they're not really paying too much attention as to what they're doing in the vineyards or what they're doing in the winery in order to make a better wine. So this is a producer that is farming organically. A lot of buzzwords here. They're also using native yeast, which doesn't make the wine like natural per se, but it's definitely something that consistently, if we're talking about like good wine, native yeast is a really important part of it. And then in this instance,
we should stop right there though and talk a little bit about like why yeast is even important, because I think that's probably something that is not obvious.
Yeah, I think yeast. So, right, you take grape juice that has sugar, add yeast, and then you get alcohol. And if it's grapes, it's wine, right? That's the basic winemaking function. But the native yeast just means that they're using, like, it happens naturally, and it always used to happen naturally. But nowadays, and this is like a little bit of a controversial subject, but you can add certain yeast to it that will make the wine like faster and also will make the wine taste a certain way. And so like a lot of commercial wineries, a lot of commercial wineries in general, they'll just like literally add like powdered yeast to the grapes so that it ferments really quickly. And then there's often like certain flavors that get associated with it. But if you're using native yeast, it's just a harder process, but there's a lot of conversation and I think just truth around it making a better product at the end of the day. But Sauvignon Blanc, we'll talk about a little bit, but has like a lot of really specific flavors. And a lot of those flavors can just get accentuated if the producer uses certain types of yeast versus allowing it just to kind of ferment spontaneously.
Thank you.
Got you. But yeah, Domaine Pele, this is I think really classic, and for me, in full transparency, Sauvignon Blanc isn't necessarily my, like, the grape that I always crave, but I think this wine's really, really, really delicious.
Why do you think that? Because I think probably everybody's had this experience. Sauvignon Blanc is like the grape, the wine that so many people start to drink first, that they're most familiar with. Do you think that's just because so much of it is made and it's just kind of everywhere and it's reasonably priced?
Yeah, I think it's a wine that, like, so this wine is a little bit different in that it's aged a little bit in oak, but Sauvignon Blanc is a wine that producers can make really quickly. So you will see, like, I don't know, like Pinot Grigio is kind of the same way. There's certain white grapes that can get made really quick and sold really quick and then consumed really quick. So like 2019 Sancerre, 2019 Rosé, some of those wines get released really quickly, which just makes the wines cheaper. And so you see them out there a lot more often. But I think Sancerre and Sauvignon Blanc, I mean, I would argue one of like the 4 most popular grapes planted throughout the whole world. And so people like have one good glass of it, they're into it, and then that's the wine that they hang on to. I feel like
Pinot Grigio is one too. Somebody pointed it out in the chat that's another one that obviously people tend to get started on, which we have our own thoughts there, but
I got in a lot of trouble for that. I got trolled for the first time hard for a few days because
our book is full of
Pinot Grigio.
Our book is full of opinions, and therefore there will be people who disagree with our opinions. But that's all right.
There are a couple good versions of Pinot Grigio out there, but in general, just you don't need to mess with it.
All right. So There's a couple good questions in here about like how do you select, how do you find a good Sauvignon Blanc? I mean, this is obviously a good one. We'll get to more broadly kind of good questions like that towards the end. We want to cover Loire specifically, but I think this is, I mean, even you and I before we jumped on, we're kind of talking about how this is like a surprise. I think a surprisingly good Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, to your point, like it's got a little oak on it, so it's a little bit different. And what else do you think makes this wine, better than average?
That's why I think it's why we wanted to talk about the Loire Valley in particular, because you can talk about Sauvignon Blanc from, I don't know, they make it in Long Island, they make it everywhere where grapes grow, because it's an easy grape to grow. So if somebody's like making wine in Michigan or Texas or something like that, chances are they're probably growing Sauvignon Blanc along the way. But the Loire is where it originates, right? And in particular, in this like kind of part of the Loire Valley where you have Menetou-Salon, you have Sancerre, you have a handful of other villages there, but that's the homeland. And so I think the Loire also has a few other grapes, which we'll talk about, but I think the best versions of Sauvignon Blanc just naturally come from the area where it's from. And the Loire has different tastes and different flavors based on the soil type and based on the climate. So the geography and the climate have you then say Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, which has like its own flavors there too. So part of the reason why we chose this to speak about in terms of Sauvignon Blanc is just because it's really from the area where the grape originates. So I think it's probably the most classic example, whereas you get like different flavors where it's grown in different places that aren't necessarily bad, but they're just different. So,
but it's funny. I do think it's even, you touched on it a little bit, but I think this is the first time I'd even seen Menetou-Salon. I've certainly drank my share of Sancerre, but how much wine do you see from this part of the world? I think you kind of touched on it, but I think it's worth circling back to.
Not a lot. Not a lot at all. It's definitely a smaller region, and this producer also makes some Sancerre. He's got it's a little bit more expensive, but he has some other wines from there. But I think Sancerre is like much larger than this area, but it's not as as well regarded, certainly, but I think Loire Valley Sauvignon Blanc, this is like a classic example of it. So there's all these towns, like the Loire is a river. It's the longest river in France. It starts down in the mountains in the south, and then it goes north, and then it dumps into the Atlantic. And kind of when it like makes a left hook.
Can you see my screen here?
Yeah, there's the river.
There you go.
It makes like a left hook. You have sort of the like four main sections of the Loire Valley, which is called like the Central Vineyards. So that's all about Sauvignon Blanc, and that's where you have Sancerre, and then you have a bunch of other small towns. There you go. And then you have Touraine, you have Anjou, and then you have Muscadet, which is very much on the ocean on the end of it. So this like section, I don't know if we can kind of pull it out larger on a map, but this section and this kind of collection of towns, oh, there you go, that's France, the world, is where you have like just Sauvignon is grown think of it as like a big county, and the only grape that they mess with as far as white wine is Sauvignon Blanc. Sancerre Rouge, if you see red Sancerre on the label, it's Pinot Noir, which is just good to know, but you don't see a ton of that either. So the Loire is, I guess, like where that red dot, that town of Nantes, I hope I said that right, Cedric, it goes just west, kind of straight across there. As you can see in Chris's background, it's mostly like rolling hills. Last week when we were talking about the Rhone, there you go.
I'm here mostly to put backgrounds up and just gesture to them.
Yeah,
That's my
real
best.
quick, I got goats in the background because
I was waiting to see. I've actually clocked it. You're at 29 and a half minutes before you address the goats behind you, but
I should have gone.
that's good commitment.
I got goats, and I got my friend Francois. He's a goat farmer, but there's a lot of goat cheese made in the Loire Valley, so I thought we'd throw it up there. We get a lot of questions about what you should eat. You should eat the cheese from goats rather than the goats themselves if you're drinking Sauvignon Blanc. But
Well, that does kind of go to the rule of like eat the food from the area that the wine is from. That's always a good way to think about stuff. Goat cheese and Sancerre work for sure.
Don't eat the goats. Goats not that good, no matter what. But yeah, so I think we got to hit on a couple of things. But the central vineyards, right? So that's where you saw on Chris's map, a bunch of towns that are concentrated that focus on Sauvignon Blanc as a grape. And then if you go west, and we'll start to talk about it, you encounter really 3 other grapes. You also encounter 3 other parts of the Loire, like wine regions, wine counties, whatever you want to call them. And those grapes are Chenin Blanc, Cabernet Franc, and also a grape that's called Melon de Bourgogne, which is Muscadet if you see it on a label. But the grape is a grape that really doesn't grow anywhere else except for that part of the world. But the Loire is super, super important wine region. I think this is an example of a winery that, they could like very easily just make cheap, pump it out, kind of grocery store level wine and probably do just fine. But he's a guy who's taking the right steps. They're farming organically. They're doing all this.
This is the Domaine Pellet we're still talking about.
Domaine Pellet. Yep. And also a couple of other wines that maybe some of you got too. But he, this is where he's from, and he's trying to make a better product than just kind of the mass-produced Sancerre Sauvignon Blanc that I think you mostly will see a lot of at the end of the day. So this is a region where it really comes down to producer. Some of the other regions in the Loire that we're talking about, you can, count on just the region as a whole producing better wine. But because of its commercial success, I think Sancerre, you really got to, you really have to navigate, which producers are making better wine than others. Otherwise, you're just going to get something that's kind of simple and unremarkable at the end of the day. But I think it's pretty good.
It's great wine. There's also a decent amount of natural wine that's being made in this part of the world as well. You want to talk a little bit about that? I know it's not on our sheet, but I just thought, if we're going to go through all the grapes and everything, it's probably worth mentioning.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So I don't know if you want to throw up, will you put on the map, we should look at Anjou, Anjou. But Sancerre, I think, and Sauvignon, you don't necessarily see like a lot of natural wine in this part. There's a couple of producers. This one producer, Sebastian Rafal, but there's a couple of producers. But we see nowadays, you see a lot of natural wine being made in kind of the center part of, I don't know, that didn't hit right.
That's what Anjou came up with. That's not right though. That's
okay. Put Vouvray. There you go.
Now we're back.
I'm back in the mix. There you go.
We're back in week 2 there for a second. All right.
Yeah. Sweet. So you see a lot of natural wines being made from Chenin Blanc. It's a grape that's gotten a lot of love from the sommelier community and also the natural wine world, as well as Cabernet Franc. And they're from the towns of like Tours and from Anjou. And I think we should talk about that. So kind of as the river goes west, you hit different towns that just historically have had different grapes grown. The soils change a little bit, but really what you're looking at is just different traditions. So yeah, that town of Tours. So Sancerre is just like a little bit to the right of it. And then you hit that kind of like central areas where you see a lot of Chenin Blanc and you see a lot of Cabernet Franc. And I think, it's interesting. There's part of it is probably like a reaction to a lot of the like overproduced, really commercial wines that you find in Sancerre and in those areas. Truthfully, there's a couple of like historical producers that have just always made like natural-ish wines, meaning they made wines, without, chasing like big oak or without, with a focus on like the quality of the wine and farming properly. But I think it's also a little bit of like groupthink in those areas that just kind of spreads out. And so what we're finding now is that this is really like one of the hot spots for natural wine. Younger producers who maybe inherited like some vineyards from their family, or who took over a family winery and decided to, kind of change the direction of it. So Chenin Blanc is the white wine from this area, and then Cabernet Franc is the red. I think it's interesting. When I first tasted the Sauvignon Blanc, and we'll get into like some of the flavors in a sec, but when we first tasted that, it kind of reminded me of Chenin Blanc in that it's like much saltier rather than really fruity. And part of that is just because of the way that the producer makes the wine. So this is like, I wouldn't call this a natural wine. I opened up a natural wine today that was sent to me. It fully looked, it was like,
I don't know where this is going, but I'm excited. What did it look like?
It looked like margarita mix. It was like super cloudy. It smelled like margarita mix too. And I drank it with my friend, with Robert Bohr, who is not a natural wine lover, but and Cedric and I when we were tasting the wine. But the the reason for it, I think, is mostly just that it's an area that's gotten some attention, and a lot of these producers have had success with the grape. But I think we should talk about some of the towns like Chenin Blanc. Do you guys have any questions? I don't know if we're asking questions specific to the Loire right now.
Yet, but one thing I was going to just ask you about, because I think maybe it's just the way the wine is made, but like I like this wine because it doesn't taste just like so much like grapefruit that it like knocks your face off, because I feel like some of the, maybe more of the California stuff specifically, but this just feels more, like you said, it's more like a Chenin Blanc maybe. And is that just the style, the way that he makes the wine? Like what's the...
Totally. Yeah. So Sauvignon Blanc, whether it's like that's from Sancerre or whether it's from New Zealand or, wherever, there's a lot of like actually pretty good Sauvignon from Italy too, is that it has that like grapefruit, lime. It also has this flavor that happens naturally that makes it taste like jalapenos, like pickled jalapenos. I worked in a deli as a kid, and the smell of pickled jalapenos is like, it's like a really bad nostalgic moment. But that happens a lot. And I think, that happens when it's just like the common flavors, smells, characteristics of the wine. But I do think that it gets like accentuated when the wine is, especially the grapefruit thing, when the wine is made in like more of a kind of quick, simple manner, right? And they do that by like adding yeast. It's all done in stainless steel, and they're just trying to like produce it and kind of kick it out. Whereas this wine, I think hopefully some of you guys are drinking it, I would say that this wine is like, it tastes a lot more like lemon. It's really salty, kind of tastes like oysters. It has like not less of like a fruity character. I hate to use the word like mineral, but that's a term that's tossed around in wine a lot. But it kind of tastes like rocks. It's like just a little, I don't know, more savory than it is fruity, I'd say. And that's because of the choices that the winemaker makes. So That's definitely like a big part of it. So they pick the grapes a little bit later, so they're just riper and richer. And then also I think, using the indigenous yeast and then the little bit of time that it spends in like neutral oak barrels is what they say. So it doesn't taste like oak, but the impact of oak on it makes it less fruity and just a little bit more savory.
Somebody asked if it would be a good wine with oysters. I think so, because it's got a little bit of that
Oh, yeah.
salinity to it, and you kind of, could enjoy them together. And there was another question about, and I think we should talk about, really there's so much to talk about with Sauvignon Blanc, and I definitely want to talk a little bit about, like I said at the end, about the stuff that doesn't come from France. But, there are from this region a lot of grapes and a lot of names and words that people will see a lot. And there was a good question in here about, Vouvray and Chenin can often be a little bit sweet. So this person, Lindsay, said, she'll favor Muscadet and Sancerre over those grapes. Is that always true, that sort of sweetness that comes from those wines versus Muscadet and Sancerre? And how do you sort of think about navigating that? I personally love Chenin, but not all of it, because sometimes it's just too, I don't know, like that honey stuff is pretty intense.
Yeah, it's weird. So Vouvray in particular is a town that you can make like all different levels of wine with sugar in it. So sweet wine. So you can make like really dry wines, and then they can make wines that have a ton of sugar in it. So I would say if you're like looking like a safe bet for dry Chenin Blanc, stay away from Vouvray in general. So there are some like really good examples of dry Vouvray, but I think it can get really confusing. And also it was an area that really popped off, and they had a lot of success with sweet wine when people love those things. So there's a lot of producers who kind of stick to that tradition of leaving a little bit of sugar behind. But that's also part of like definitely the natural wine thing. So Saumur, which we threw in the worksheet here, I think Saumur is definitely your like safest town to look for if you want dry Chenin Blanc. So Muscadet and Sancerre, and Menatu-Salon, so Sauvignon Blanc for that matter, and also Chenin, they all are grapes that have a lot of acidity, and acidity is just the like tart sensation that we get from whether you're like sucking on a lime or on a grape that has a lot of acidity to it. It is just like the tartness and kind of the thing that makes wines refreshing and makes your mouth pucker. But certain grapes have more acidity than other grapes. Chenin Blanc is a grape that has a lot of acidity. So when people didn't always want like these ultra dry, ultra crisp, ultimately like kind of tart wines, they left some sugar in the wines so that they would balance them out, and people just wanted sweeter things. Like our tastes collectively have really changed. So that didn't happen in Muscadet, and that didn't happen in Sancerre. Those wines were always like fully fermented dry, no sugar left behind, where Chenin Blanc was a grape that you definitely got like that honeyed kind of sweet thing to it, and they would leave sugar behind. Sugar behind in order to have that. But nowadays you find much more dry Chenin Blanc than before, so you should definitely check it out. Again, in particular from towns like Saumur are really good areas too.
Super. There's a bunch of questions here that maybe are making me think we should circle back a little bit, ranging from pretty basic. So I think I saw one of the questions was the wine, the Mentu-Salon, the Domaine Pillet, is that Sancerre Sauvignon Blanc. It's Sauvignon Blanc, but it's Mentu-Salon is the little area next to or close to Sancerre. So that's the differentiation there.
So Sancerre is a town, right? It's not a grape. And Mentu-Salon is a town, and they're literally just next door. The vineyards just roll through. So you could like, this is Sancerre as far as we're concerned.
Just because it's similar though, because it's actually not technically, but it's close enough.
Technically, but like physically, it's the same thing. And it's Sauvignon Blanc is the grape. Right? Yeah. So we're drinking Sauvignon right now.
Alex Conrad says it's easy to drink fast. That's not a question, just a fact. You are absolutely right. What
Definitely.
about how important are vintage years when selecting a Sauvignon Blanc?
Not that important whatsoever.
Just because there's not that much differentiation, right? I mean,
Well, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like it's a wine that you don't really age, and so I'm a believer that vintage is most important if you're aging the wine because that's where you start to see like a lot of the differences of a really hot year or of a really cold year really start to come out like as the wine ages. But Sauvignon Blanc in general, it's if you're really diving in there, it might be more acidic, it might be sweeter depending on the year, but it's safe to say that the wine will be like really consistent.
yeah.
Just year in year out, it'll have that kind of crisp, chuggable flavor to it.
And then this is something that's come up like every time, and I think especially in France, it's confusing. But a question about whether or not there are those classifications of like Grand Cru in this area, to which the answer is no.
It's no. What you will see is like there's a couple in Sancerre in particular, and also with some like Cabernet Franc and some Chenin Blanc producers. There's definitely some vineyards that are like larger vineyards and really well known that producers will throw on the label and they'll charge a little bit more money for because it's like a special place. Sancerre has a couple ones called like Mont d'Amné, and in Chenin Blanc there's a vineyard called Breze that you see. Those like technically are like Grand Cru sites, but there's no legal
classification.
No, it's not. That really only exists in Burgundy.
Right.
Burgundy, and then like in Italy, there's a vineyard. Well, no, that's not even true. But yeah, Burgundy is really the only place. Burgundy.
Bordeaux has some classifications as well.
Yeah, those are classifications based on the specific producers, too, rather than vineyards. So. But Sauvignon Blanc is a very drinkable wine. You're
right. Cool. So I just wanted to make sure we tackled those broad questions. Cool. All right. So like there is so much here. I just want to make sure we get to, particularly, I think I wanted to make sure we touch on Muscadet, and then there's a lot, I think a reasonable amount to talk about around Cabernet Franc. So
yeah.
Muscadet, what's important?
Muscadet. So don't worry too much about the name of the grape for Muscadet because it's called Melon de Bourgogne, but you won't really ever see that on the label, and you also won't really see that. There's like a couple producers in California that make it, but you won't really ever see it out there. So whereas like if you really like this wine, you should check out Sauvignon Blanc from other parts. So Muscadet is like the coast, Spain. It's where the river dumps into the ocean. As a wine, the wine is like incredibly acidic naturally. And so what they do, just like one little thing is what they do is they leave the wine aging for a period of time on it's called lees, which is like the dead yeast cells, right? We're getting geeky here, but when
a lot of yeast talk today.
A lot of yeast talk today is and what that does though, it's the same thing that happens in champagne when they age champagne, is it adds a flavor to the wines that gets kind of like nutty and a little bit creamier. So the wines have a little bit more richness to them. But because Muscadet is like such a tart wine, if they didn't do that, it probably like just wouldn't taste that good. It would be painful to drink. So Muscadet it has like this really, really, really kind of sharp crispness to it. It's usually pretty low in alcohol. And it also has this kind of like nutty, sort of creamy flavor because of the way that the wines must be aged. So producers, even like this producer, they like will make that kind of technical decision in order to make the grapes taste a little bit differently. But in Muscadet, they all got together and they're like, hey, if we're actually going to sell wine from here that people are going to enjoy, we got to like age it in this very, very specific way so that people don't think our wine sucks, and it's, painful to drink because we're just sucking down lemon juice. But Muscadet, it should always be cheap. Doesn't really age that well, and it's really crisp. If you like this wine because you're like, wow, this is really refreshing, you should definitely check out Muscadet because it's just like a really great summer seafood, pop the cork, kind of drink it, don't really think about it sort of wine.
And almost always pretty reasonably priced.
Yeah, you don't really ever have to pay. If you're like paying up for Muscadet, it probably isn't going to taste like Muscadet. So just don't waste your time. But it's a good wine. Yeah, you see it a lot in like French bistros and stuff like that. So yeah. I'm into it.
Lindsay actually pointed something out that's worth, I think, just because you mentioned Muscadet being like crisp, that she thought that the Domaine Pellet tasted like a crisp Riesling.
Yeah.
And asked if you think there's similarities between the two.
Yeah, I think dry Riesling can, Riesling is a little, if it's like totally dry, it can still be a little bit more like floral even. Riesling for me, like always tastes like peaches, whereas this wine always tastes more like citrus. And they are very, very similar though. I think the flavor, like somebody was talking about Chablis earlier. Chablis would have like more body and just more richness to it, even if it wasn't like aged in oak per se, but would definitely be similar. But I think Riesling is another grape that has a lot of acidity to it too. But yeah, it definitely is really similar to Riesling in the way that it tastes. I think it smells a little bit different if you're really trying to like look at specific flavors. They're different, but I think the overall like sensation of the taste is really similar.
And really quick, somebody asked what a reasonable price for a Muscadet would be.
Like $25.
Yeah, $20, $30 tops.
Yeah.
Right?
If you're buying it by the glass, whenever we get back to restaurants, it should be like $12 to $15. Nothing more than that, even cheaper.
To your point about French bistros, I think I've probably had my fair share of it at places like Blue Ribbon Brasserie late at night when I don't want to spend a lot of money, but I just want to like pound it with some oysters.
Yeah, and you're like, I don't want to feel like a degenerate and take shots. Well,
yeah, exactly.
Shrimp cocktail. No, Muscadet is a perfect wine for if you're just trying to drink, but you want to drink wine because you're trying to regulate a little bit.
Because you're a responsible adult, and that's what responsible adults do.
Exactly. To wine drinking.
Cabernet Franc is one that it's funny. I don't know why, but I started drinking a bunch of Cabernet Franc a couple of years ago because one of the somebody turned me on to Olga Rafal, one of the producers on this list, which makes really good Cab Franc, and like you can buy old Cab Franc that they make for fairly reasonable prices. But
definitely,
it's a blending grape for sure. But from this region, there's a reasonable amount of it that is worth drinking on its own. So let's talk a little bit about that and why it smells and tastes like green bell peppers.
Oh no, it really does, right?
Yes, it does.
It's crazy.
A dead giveaway.
If you've never smelled anything other than wine, you should buy some Cabernet Franc and smell that shit, and it'll smell like green bell peppers. I promise. But it is, it's a grape that you see in Bordeaux. You see it in like certain producers make, mostly Cabernet Franc wines in Bordeaux, but you see it primarily in the Loire, right around where Chenin Blanc grows, so kind of that central part. And Olga Rafal is a producer from the town of Chinon. I'd say Chinon is probably like the most well-regarded area for Cabernet Franc, right? If it says Chinon on the label, it must be 100% Cabernet Franc. But pretty much if you're like asked for like a Loire Valley red, it definitely should be Cab Franc. Tried and true. There's a little bit of Gamay, there's a little bit of Pinot Noir planted there, but Cabernet Franc is really like what the grape is all about. And Cabernet Franc can get really confusing because Cabernet Sauvignon makes such big wines, right? The wines are just naturally like higher in alcohol. They're darker, they're juicier, they're just more full bodied, which is great. But Cabernet Franc is a grape that I would say is like a medium to often lighter wine,
Yeah.
which throws people off just because it shares the Cabernet with Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think that Cab Franc, I really like it because it is one of those wines that it's just sort of something that you like crave if you want something that's like funky and earthy. It kind of always delivers, right? Because
Yeah.
naturally as a grape, it has those flavors. Like Cabernet Franc, if it is really fruity and really juicy, it's just probably not all Cab Franc in the blend, but naturally it should always be kind of really smoky, almost vegetal. It's really earthy, and it's really just pretty much like it's light and crisp with all those things. Whereas like Pinot Noir is a light and crisp grape, and it's much more like floral and fruity and kind of gentle in that way. Whereas Cab
Yeah.
Franc is definitely like a pretty
I'd always heard, I mean, early on as I was discovering wine, I'd always heard that, French wines are earthy, right? And to me, drinking Cab Franc is the best example of that, or certainly one of them. And it's definitely something that I think makes people not like it when they drink, things like Chenin. If you don't like that kind of funky, like earthy taste, then you may not want to mess with this. But
yeah, but I like it. And again, like the wines are usually pretty inexpensive, and they definitely have like unique flavors to them. You don't really see Cab Franc aged in new oak that often. So if you find yourself not loving like the kind of oaky flavors that you would find in certain wines, Loire Valley Reds are a good spot to go.
yeah, and I honestly like that. The Olga Rafal wines, like you'll see that on our list of producers. I've
Yeah.
always found that those wines are pretty widely distributed, so you can find them on a lot of restaurant wine lists, especially at like nice restaurants. And if you want to drink a good bottle of wine and even something with some age on it, but you don't want to drop like at an expensive restaurant, $200 or $300, it's often a really good option where for 100 and something dollars, which sometimes is like the cheapest bottle on a list at some of these higher end restaurants. It's a good option. And I don't know. It's like I've always found it to be kind of like something I'll look for if I have no idea what is on the list and I'm just browsing, because a lot of places will have it, and a lot of wine stores have it too. Uh,
Definitely.
and I think like I found like at one of the wine stores in the city, I think not Parcel, but much inferior wine store. I found a bottle of I want to say like 1986 Cabernet Franc from Olga Rafal for like $85 or something, which is just kind of an interesting, is really good. And by the way, for some reason, this wine tends, at least from that producer, tends to age pretty well, or at least hold up and not taste like it's fully
No,
dead.
Cab Franc tastes really, it ages super well. I think somebody asked about like vintages for Cabernet Franc, and I think we said that like vintage doesn't necessarily matter as much for or yeah, don't get obsessive about it for like Sauvignon Blanc, but whereas Cabernet Franc, it really does matter because some of that like green bell pepper thing is a characteristic that you get in really cold years, whereas the wines get fruitier in really warm years. So vintages do matter with that, but ultimately it's a grape that ages super well and it gets really interesting. And I don't know, like what, maybe it's just because nobody really drank the wines for a long time. So Olga Rafo's got like all this old wine,
Yeah.
but it's a great producer. You can find like, I don't know, 30-year-old wine for $100 plus whatever on a wine list, which is, yeah, it's not nothing to spend $100, but it's still it's cool to try like an older wine, and they're definitely aged well and will drink delicious. But
I did that with a friend of mine who only drinks red Burgundy, and I don't remember where we were, but I found a bottle of the Olga Rafal on a wine list, and I think it was probably 10 years old or something like that. And he was
yeah,
actually unbelievably surprised how much he liked it, just because there's enough similarity, I think, to Pinot Noir that it was kind of in the wheelhouse, but different and interesting and really good. So worth trying for sure.
definitely.
And some of those other producers, I mean, it's actually usually a pretty affordable wine. So you definitely don't have to spend 50, 60, 70, $80 to drink good Chenin.
No, but Chinon's good. Yeah, Samour Champagny, which we also wrote in there, I think is like probably the best like premier region right now for both producers and Cab Franc in general. So
Somebody pointed out that it's true that New York actually makes a decent amount of Cab Franc, and you'll see
it
both
does.
Long Island and upstate.
Yeah, we sell some at Parcel. It's really good. Truthfully, it's like I think New York is an area that does well with like Loire Valley grapes. It also does well with Riesling, of course, which somebody asked for or asked about earlier in terms of like the flavors of the wine. So um, yeah, you see it a lot. I think it's probably I like it a little bit more from the Finger Lakes. The like I'm by no means am I a New York wine expert here, but there's a couple of examples of it from up there that are really tasty. And Long Island gets really like hot, so the wines can get like a little bit bigger over there, which Cabernet Franc doesn't really work. It's more of a cooler climate, and I would say nowadays a cooler vintage um, wine for sure. So if you're looking for like, it's also a wine that I think is deserving where Sauvignon Blanc isn't always deserving of like spending money on, but Cabernet Franc, you know, for what we were saying earlier about age-worthy wines, if you're really into it and you want to splash out a little bit, it's definitely a wine that is worth, you know, up in the price for.
Well, and there's one specific producer who's like incredibly expensive now and very sought after that we drank at where did we drink?
The Clos Rougeard.
Clos Rougeard, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that stuff's crazy. It's really good, and it's weird. It's one of those wines that like the producer sells it for whatever. Say the producer sells it for $20. Like the day they sell it, somebody else is selling it to someone else for 100 to 200, and next thing you know, it's like a fucking $500 bottle of wine that, you know, 10, 15 years ago was a $60 bottle of wine, and that nobody really cared about just because it has like this cult appeal to it.
Yeah.
The wines are good.
So I want to talk a little bit with the time we have left about some of the other places where you can find Sauvignon Blanc. And but I do one thing that was mentioned here, which I think is actually interesting, is that you know what's cool about the Loire Valley is it's once we can all travel again, it's actually really easy to get to from Paris. It's one of the places you can jump on a train from Paris to get to, like, I think you can take a train to Tours for it's like a 2-hour train or something like that. The problem is you can't just walk into most French vineyards like you can, you know, in Napa Valley or something. So is there a good tip for people once we can all leave our houses again, and if somebody's taking a trip to go explore wine in this area, that kind of leads you to places where you can actually go and taste the wines in where they make it?
Yeah. Well, you guys hit us up at Parcel. We'll set you up with wine appointments, and Christine might still be on here, and she's like, just fucked her shit up. But it's I think the best thing is to write to producers directly in advance, and they'll see you, provided that, you know, maybe you speak a little bit of French or they speak some English. But I think like the Loire might be the Loire is definitely a more approachable region than say like Burgundy and Bordeaux. So you can't just like don't just like roll up and knock on somebody's door, because it doesn't really fly like that. They don't have like tasting rooms in the same way that we do here. But if you like hit them up, I think, and you're excited, you say, I had a really great bottle of wine on a Zoom chat of your wine, and I want to like come
It'll
check.
totally make sense to them by then. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. I want to come check it out, and I want to meet your goats in the background here. They'll be hyped, and they'll let you in. But I think like if you want to visit regions in France and you want to like meet people and not have it be, you know, a total headache, the best areas are the Loire. I would say Beaujolais is a really good spot to go to as well. There's also really good food in the Loire, which really helps. There's not really good food in all the wine regions, believe it or not. But Beaujolais, and also in the Rhone, I think people are super open to it. But Burgundy and Bordeaux are
Champagne too, right? I mean, there's enough big stuff, like the big houses in
Champagne
Champagne.
too, yeah. Champagne's super. You can do like a day trip to Champagne from Paris.
Just don't try to rent a car there. We have experience, and it does not work out well. But or no, take a train. We tried to take the train back, and it was a disaster. Probably because we drank too much wine the night before. Cool. So let's talk just briefly.
Questions.
Well, yeah. So I just want to we can hit some of the questions, but I do think it's super interesting. Something I learned when I took the introductory class at like the Court of Master Sommeliers a while ago. And one of the things that actually,
You're a sommelier technically.
Yeah, yes, I'm officially. No, I don't think I passed that part. I think I just passed the part that was like you gave us money and learned some things. So here, but it was actually
you passed the part that nobody fails.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's, by the way, that's very much in line with my academic history across the board. So no, but it was actually really interesting that one of the things that I learned that actually made so much sense to me, I think Sauvignon Blanc is a perfect example, is that, you know, you see this grape everywhere, right? And a lot of the reason is that when trade, you know, way back in the day when trading was happening often by ships, the French traders would travel with vines on the boats. And that's why, like, for example, in South Africa, you'll see Sauvignon Blanc because they would travel with their vines and stop at the bottom of the Horn of Africa for however many weeks or months they needed to stop for as they went on to Asia, and they'd plant the vines. That like blew my mind when I learned that. And it's actually such an interesting thing when you think about the fact that these French grapes exist all over the world in many reasons, you know, much because in many ways because of that fact that these traders and
you see Chenin Blanc in South Africa too. You shouldn't drink it, but you see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the same thing, and I think that's why you see like a lot of there's this right now. It's cool. You can, you know, we were drinking a bottle of wine last night of a producer that is working with like Italian grapes in California, and it's the same thing. Immigrants came over, they took vine cuttings of what, you know, they had like grown in their backyard or what they knew how to make. They planted them wherever they ended up, in their garden, like relatively speaking, you know, just with the idea to like make wine for themselves, and that was the same thing. So yeah, I think a lot of.
Where else do you think you can find kind of, you know, good Sauvignon Blanc or even other grapes from this region? I mean, we talked about Cab Franc being pretty prevalent in New York, and
yeah, I think so New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is like the most successful brand of Sauvignon Blanc after Sancerre, right? We've all like seen it here at New Zealand. Sauvignon Blanc has much more of like, it's interesting because we were talking about it with Cab Franc, but it has this like jalapeno flavor to it. When you're doing like the next test, you start to blind taste things, and if you have Sancerre next to New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, Sancerre is more like grapefruit, kind of limey, citrusy, and then New Zealand is like you're eating like a jalapeno pepper. And it's much more like grassy and kind of vegetal. So New Zealand is the main place. Sauvignon Blanc in California, interestingly enough, because there's also a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc grown in Bordeaux. It's the grape that's like made Semillon, but also Sauvignon Blanc are the grapes of Bordeaux Blanc. So you see it in Bordeaux, and then also you see it in California, but it's aged in oak. So it's much more kind of like creamy and more honeyed and rich. But that's what you're drinking ultimately if you're drinking Bordeaux. And then I think Italy, in particular, the northeastern part of Italy, so like Alto Adige, where they grow Pinot Grigio, you're better off drinking Sauvignon Blanc than Pinot Grigio. So Friuli, and also like kind of central north Italy, there's a ton of Sauvignon Blanc up there that's actually really good. It's much more similar to what you find in Sancerre and Manitoulin.
Well, why don't we should maybe kind of a good place to close is just because I think people have a lot of experience, you know, with California wines generally, and you'll see, you know, enough Sauvignon Blanc from California. So what's a good way to, you know, navigate California Sauvignon Blanc?
A good way to navigate California Sauvignon
Like, are
Blanc.
there
If
good,
it
are there
says,
specific producers? Is
yeah,
there?
here's one thing. If it says Fumé Blanc on it, which I think is something that like is definitely becoming extinct, that means that the wine is likely aged in oak. So it's going to taste like Chardonnay, but Chardonnay that's like less about being like buttery popcorn
Yeah.
flavors and more being like popcorn and like green bell pepper flavors. It's really not that good. But I would say there's a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc that's grown in Santa Barbara County that can be pretty good too. But I think like dollar for dollar, if you're drinking Sauvignon Blanc, I'm sorry to my friends in California, but you should stick to just stick to France because you're gonna get it for the same price and that's it. But Sauvignon Blanc, I don't think is California's best grape and definitely not its answer to Sancerre.
All right. A couple of questions here that I don't know that I even know off the top of my head. Do we know what our wine is for next week? It must be in a newsletter by now, right?
I think we're gonna do Chianti.
Oh, right. Okay, cool. Yeah. So
Make yourself some pasta.
that's right. And then go ahead.
No.
That's it. Make pasta. By the way, if you're not eating pasta, if you're not eating a shitload of pasta right now, you're doing quarantine wrong. But Chianti will be a good discussion around that. So that's a good way to end. So basically, the best way to sort of know what's coming and to also get links on the wines themselves is to sign up. We have a newsletter that you can find in the link in the chat there, along with the book that we send out, and it'll give you everything in advance. And we'll talk a little bit about what's coming. Parcel ships nationwide. If you're not in New York, delivers in New York right now, but hopefully also we'll be able to find, if you need help finding something and you want to email us, just wine@theinfatuation.com is a great place to email. Also, if we didn't get to some of your questions, there's a ton of questions here today, which is awesome. And thank you guys so much. We're happy to answer more questions on wine@theinfatuation.com. We're always, myself, Grant, Hillary, our editor-in-chief, and a couple other people are on there and just like totally psyched to chat and answer questions and be helpful if we can. Somebody asked that you don't need to RSVP over and over again. I think you should get the Zoom link no matter what at this point. So just keep a lookout for that. We try to send the link out, I think like right an hour or two before class. So, but if you have problems or you just can't figure out why you're not getting links or something like that, shoot us an email. We're still very much learning, how these things work as we navigate virtual events. But these have been great. So thank you very much for joining us. The really last thing I'll say is we haven't been charging for these, but we have been raising money for World Central Kitchen via The Infatuation and Zagat. We blew past our $10,000 goal and we're approaching $20,000, which is our sort of new goal. So anything you can contribute will help. I'm sure you guys have all seen what Jose Andres and his organization are doing. There's so much really great stuff, and we're all happy to support it. So even like $5 goes a really, really long way. And thank you guys so much for being here. We'll see you next week.
You guys rule. Enjoy your Sauvignon Blanc.
Bye, guys. Thank you.